The courtroom laughed before Judith Sheindlin did, and that was how she knew something was wrong. On the docket, it sounded harmless. A young bride, a hired grandmother, $500 unpaid dollars. It had the shape of a funny little case, the kind that made people in the gallery lean toward one another before anyone had even sworn to tell the truth. But Judith had spent too many years in family court to trust the first shape of a case. People rarely came to court for only the thing written on the form. They came for a bill and ended up talking about abandonment. They came for a broken promise and accidentally revealed a broken home. They came angry about money because grief was too embarrassing to carry in public. She read the names again. Miriam Rosen versus Natalie Crane. Breach of oral agreement. Wedding appearance. Natalie Crane stood first. 29, polished, pretty, still wearing the look of a woman who had planned every photograph months before the wedding. Her chestnut hair seemed to remember the formal updo. Her pale pink nails rested against the podium. She looked embarrassed, but not sorry. Miriam Rosen stood beside her with both hands folded over a small black purse. 79 years old. Silver curls, lavender cardigan, navy dress. A thin gold wedding band. She did not look angry, and that caught Judith's attention. Plaintiffs who wanted money often arrived like a slammed door. Miriam looked like a door that had been quietly closed. Judith said, "Mrs. Rosen, you are suing the defendant for $500. Miriam nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Judith turned to Natalie. "And you admit you asked this woman to attend your wedding and present herself as your grandmother." Someone in the gallery laughed. Natalie lifted her chin. Natalie said, "It was not exactly like that." Judith leaned back. "Then we will all sit here until you tell me exactly what it was." Natalie explained that her fiancé's family cared about appearances. The wedding had been at a country club, with white flowers, tall windows, and a string quartet. Her own family was smaller and messier. Her parents were divorced. Her father had not come. Her real grandmother lived in Ridgewood and, as Natalie put it, was difficult. A friend had introduced her to Miriam, a retired school secretary who volunteered at senior events and had once acted in community theater. Miriam looked elegant, grandmotherly, presentable. Natalie promised her $500, a seat with the family, dinner, and a photograph with the bride. Judith said, "You rented a human being because she matched the furniture?" Natalie flushed. "No, Your Honor. I wanted the day to feel normal." Inside, Judith heard the sentence beneath the sentence. Normal is what people say when they mean presentable. "Mrs. Rosen, did you attend?" "Yes." "Did you sit with the family?" "Yes." "Did you do what she asked you to do?" Miriam looked at Natalie, then back at the bench. "I did." Judith turned to Natalie. "Did you pay her?" Natalie looked down. "No." The case could have ended there. Agreement made, service performed, payment due. A clean ruling in 4 minutes. But Miriam's hands had begun to tremble. Just enough for Judith to see the purse move. So Judith did not end it. She said, "Mrs. Rosen, why did you agree to this?" The room settled. Miriam swallowed. "I thought it would be nice." Judith waited. "My husband died 12 years ago. My son moved to Arizona. My daughter calls on holidays. I have grandchildren, but they are busy people. Good people. Just busy." The old woman tried to smile and failed. "When Miss Crane asked me, I knew it was silly. I am not a fool. But she brought me a corsage. She asked what color I liked. She said I would sit in the front row." Her voice broke at the front row. Judith felt the room change. She thought of all the older women she had seen in courtrooms. Mothers treated like storage. Grandmothers called only when someone needed money, childcare, or a signature. Women who had spent a lifetime being useful then discovered usefulness was not the same as being loved. Miriam lifted her eyes. She said, "For one afternoon, I had a family again." The laughter died so completely that even the cameras seemed to go still. Judith did not move. The sentence entered the room and sat there, like another witness. Sometimes the smallest debt is the one that tells you who was really alone. Judith looked at Natalie Crane for a long second, and the young woman looked back like someone who had just realized the case was no longer about money. That was the danger of a courtroom. You walked in carrying the version of yourself you preferred. Then a stranger asked the right question, and the version cracked. Judith had built a career out of finding that crack. She did not confuse embarrassment with injustice, but she also knew shame when it tried to dress itself as reason. Judith said, "Miss Crane, did Mrs. Rosen do anything improper at your wedding?" "No." "Was she rude to your guests?" "No." "Did she embarrass you?" Natalie hesitated. "She got emotional." Judith's eyes narrowed. "Emotional how?" "During the father-daughter dance, she cried. People noticed." "And because people noticed tears at a wedding, you decided not to pay her?" "No, it was more than that." Natalie swallowed. "She started acting like she really was my grandmother." Judith leaned forward. "You mean she performed the role too well?" Natalie's face reddened. "She fixed my veil. She told me to eat before the ceremony. She told my husband to be patient with me. She asked if she could keep the corsage. It was uncomfortable." In Judith's mind, a sentence rose. You are not uncomfortable because she lied. You were uncomfortable because she meant it. She did not say it yet. Instead, Judith asked, "Where is your actual grandmother?" Natalie blinked. "That's not relevant." "It became relevant the moment you hired a stranger to take her place. Where is she?" "In Ridgewood." "Alive?" "Yes." "Invited?" Natalie said nothing. Judith let the silence work. People thought she interrupted because she was impatient. Sometimes she was, but sometimes silence did what words could not. It gave the truth nowhere to hide. Natalie finally said, "We have not spoken in years." "Why?" "She is difficult." Judith looked down at the file, though she did not need it. Difficult is a large word. It covers everything from cruelty to inconvenience. Natalie's eyes shone. "She judged my mother. She judged my father. She judged everyone. I did not want her there making comments and ruining things." Miriam whispered, almost to herself, "Grandmothers do that sometimes." Judith heard it. So did Natalie. And this is the part of the story most people have never heard. During a short pause, while the room settled, Judith looked not at the cameras, but at Miriam's hands. The left hand wore a dull gold band. The right hand held a folded handkerchief. Miriam had come prepared to cry. Older women often did. They brought tissues. They brought receipts. They brought their best coat. They brought dignity, so thin one careless laugh could tear it. Then, Natalie said the thing that changed the temperature of the room. Natalie said, "She should have understood. It was business." Judith's jaw tightened. "Business?" "Yes. I hired her for a service. She got dinner. She got attention. She was in pictures. She cannot now pretend she was used." Miriam's face changed. Not anger. Hurt. Judith said, "Mrs. Rosen, did you ask to be in the pictures?" Miriam shook her head. "The photographer put me there. The mother of the groom said, 'Stand with the family.' So I did." Judith turned to Natalie. "And afterward?" "I said I would send a check." "Did you?" "No." "Did Mrs. Rosen call you?" "Yes." "How many times?" "Maybe 3. Miriam corrected gently. 4. Judith's voice stayed calm. What did you do after the fourth call? Natalie looked at the floor. I stopped answering. The old anger stirred in Judith then. It belonged to family court hallways and support cases, and children who learned early that adults could make promises with no intention of holding them. But beneath the anger was something more complicated. Judith understood appearances. She had lived inside them too. The robe, the collar, the glare. The neat little box America had built around her. People thought if you looked strong, you did not need tenderness. She looked at Natalie and saw not a monster, but a young woman who had edited her family like a photograph, cropped out the difficult grandmother, smoothed the rough parts, replaced blood with an actress who could be controlled for an afternoon. Judith said, "You wanted the look of love without the inconvenience of loving anybody." Natalie's voice cracked. "That's not fair." No. What is not fair is inviting an old woman into your loneliness, letting her believe she mattered for 3 hours, and then treating her feelings as a costume you returned after the reception. The courtroom held its breath. Natalie whispered, "I did not think she would care." There it was, the small sentence beneath the injury. I did not think she would care. Judith had heard versions of it all her life. I did not think my mother would mind. I did not think my child would remember. I did not think the old woman would care. Inside, Judith answered silently, "That is how harm enters the house. It wears the face of not thinking." Miriam looked at Natalie. I cared. Those 2 words did more than the gavel ever could. Judith knew the law could not order a granddaughter to remember her real grandmother. It could not make an old woman less lonely or a young woman less ashamed. But it could draw a clean line around one afternoon and say, "You used her time, her face, and her heart, and now you will pay what you promised." Judith said, "Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $500. The ruling was simple. The damage was not. Miriam did not look relieved. She looked bereaved. Sometimes the smallest debt is the one that tells you who was really alone. What America never saw was what happened after the cameras stopped. The audience moved. Papers were gathered. The next case waited in another folder. Television has a rhythm. Pain enters, pain speaks, pain exits, and another pair of strangers steps forward. Judith understood the machinery. She also knew what the machinery could not hold. As Miriam Rosen turned to leave, Natalie hesitated near the aisle. For the first time all afternoon, the bride did not look polished. She looked 29 and frightened, like a child who had made a mess too large for a napkin. Natalie said, "Mrs. Rosen." Miriam stopped. Natalie said, "I am sorry." It was not enough. Judith knew it was not enough. But sometimes not enough is the only door people can open at first. Miriam nodded once. "You looked beautiful." The sentence nearly undid Natalie, not because it was cruel, because it was generous. Judith watched from the bench, expression composed, eyes missing nothing. She had been called tough, harsh, impossible, cold. She had also spent decades watching people win cases and still walk out empty. That was what stayed with her. Not the judgment, the face after the judgment. The person who got the money and still did not get back what had been taken. Later that day, behind the set, Judge Sheindlin found her sitting with the file closed in her lap. He had seen her like that before. Not often. Enough. Jerry said, "Rough one?" Judith glanced up. $500. Jerry smiled faintly. "That rough?" She did not smile back. A woman rented herself out as a grandmother and forgot to protect herself from meaning it. Jerry's face changed. 2 judges in one marriage learn that not every verdict needs a response. After a moment, he said, You gave her the judgment. Judith looked toward the closed door. I gave her the money. Jerry waited. Judith said, I could not give her the family. That was the truth she carried home. For all the years America watched her behind the bench, Judith Sheindlin became a symbol of certainty. She knew when someone was lying. She knew when a story did not add up. She knew when nonsense was being dressed as an excuse. Viewers loved the stare, the speed, the sentence that ended the argument. But certainty was only one part of her. The private cost was knowing what certainty could not repair. She could identify neglect, but she could not return an easier childhood. She could expose selfishness, but she could not give back wasted years. She could order $500 paid to Miriam Rosen, but she could not make that wedding table real. And years later, that single afternoon would mean something different. It would not be remembered as a strange case about photographs. It would sit beside older memories from family court. Mothers who came in angry because anger was safer than grief. Fathers who wanted praise for appearing once. Grandparents who raised children, then disappeared from the story when the children grew. Murray Blum had taught his daughter in Brooklyn that people reveal themselves in what they do when no one important is watching. That day, Natalie revealed herself not by hiring Miriam, but by refusing to imagine Miriam could feel. Miriam revealed herself not by suing, but by admitting that pretend belonging had touched something real. Judith's work was never merely about law. It was about forcing people to look at the thing they were trying not to name. That evening, Judith removed her earrings before the mirror. The pearls came off. The robe was gone. Her face in the glass was not the face viewers paused their televisions to watch. It was older, quieter, less interested in winning. She thought, but did not say, that the hardest part of being seen as tough was how rarely people asked what tenderness had cost you. She had built a life out of refusing nonsense. She had also spent that life standing close enough to loneliness to recognize it before it introduced itself. Jerry appeared in the doorway. Jerry said, "You are still with that case." Judith looked at him in the mirror. "Yes." "Why?" She paused with one earring in her hand. "Because everybody laughed." Jerry nodded slowly. Judith said, "And she did not." The world saw Judge Judy as the woman who could cut through a lie in 10 seconds. But underneath the glare was a woman who understood why people lied. For money, yes. For pride, to win. But sometimes they lied because the truth was too humiliating to say aloud. I was lonely. I was ashamed of my family. I wanted to be loved without being known. I wanted one afternoon in the front row. Sometimes the smallest debt is the one that tells you who was really alone. And on that afternoon, the debt was not only $500. It was a corsage kept in a drawer, a photograph with a stranger, a real grandmother left uncalled, a judge who heard the laughter and knew, before anyone else did, that the funny case was about to break someone's heart. Subscribe for more untold chapters from the life and legacy of Judge Judy.